I'm Alan Wardis, and you're listening to Think Radio.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison's locally owned hometown newspaper, and by the Western State Colorado University Office of Academic Affairs. Think Radio is also supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can become a Think Radio patron, visit alanwardesmedia.com. That's ALANWARTES media.com.
One of the issues that never seems to go away in the Gunnison Valley is housing. That is, housing you can actually afford to rent or buy on average wages you can earn around here. But we're not alone. It turns out communities all over the country are facing this same dilemma. It's easy enough to define the problem. In 2016, local governments commissioned a study called the Gunnison Valley Housing Needs Assessment. In a nutshell, it supported what people already know, that we're in trouble. What's not so easy to figure out is what to do about it. Housing is not cheap to build, and it takes time. And there are other things, like free market economics, to consider. This year, one possible solution did surface. It's a proposed development called the Corner at Brush Creek. It would add a number of deed-restricted units to the affordable housing stock near Crested Butte. And according to the plan, it won't cost a nickel of taxpayer money. But, not surprisingly, the project has triggered a rigorous debate in the community. My guest today is Gary Gates, founder and owner of Gatesco, the Houston-based company behind the proposal, and John O'Neill, project manager. Gary, John, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I would really like to start with John today because I think a lot of people know who Gary is. We'll get to that in a minute, but I'd really love to hear from you. John, your place in the community, your role in this project, just to bring us up to speed on what it is you bring to the table.
Yeah, well, I actually grew up in Crested Butte. My family moved to town in 1975, went to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade up there, and came down to here to Gunnison for high school. After high school, I left for about 25 years, lived in Europe for many years, did quite a few things, and we came back to the Valley 2007. We built a house in Crested Butte, and then the downturn came, and so I had to leave again. Went to Austin, Texas for 6 years, worked for a tech company, and we moved back to Crested Butte about a year and a half ago. When I moved back to the Valley, I really wanted to do something that would make a difference and chose the problem of affordable housing. Started a small company with a friend of mine, and we're just getting started on that when I met Gary, and he shared with me about this project, what it was about, and I wanted to join him in helping bring a solution to the housing crisis in the Valley.
And why, John? What was it about affordable housing? Out of all the things you could have gotten involved in, why that?
You know, I think a lot of it had to do with what I saw Crested Butte becoming. You know, when you walk down the street or drive down the street at night, there's a lot of dark streets where people just aren't living there. And I saw the fabric of the town changing, the character of Crested Butte, the north end of the valley changing. And I thought, you know, I want to help make room for locals. I want to provide housing for local families, people who want to build a life here, help provide that housing to give them a start.
And so having grown up here, what were the big changes that you felt like you saw? You had something to compare it to more than most, really. What did you see?
Well, I think I just saw empty houses, and I saw families leaving the north end of the valley. Couldn't find a place to live, couldn't afford where they were living. And so it was the year-round residents, the locals, that were leaving. A lot of the properties were being purchased by second homeowners, which is great. But I just saw the makeup of the community changing. You know, when I was a kid, we were turned loose in town. Dirt streets, everybody lived in town. I didn't have one friend that lived at CB South, maybe one or two up on the mountain. But we were all in town, and that's where we lived. And I'd like for Crested Butte to continue to be a robust, thriving, real town with a robust, thriving year-round population.
All right, and so what is the role that you play on the Brush Creek project?
I think Gary brought me on kind of as a project manager. We built the team together, strong local team that we have. It just to kind of keep the ball rolling, keep everybody on task, keep everybody focused. We started off with an RFQ, an RFP.
And tell our listeners what that means. What do those letters stand for?
Yeah, the RFQ was a request for qualifications. There were 5 organizations who submitted responses to the RFQ. 2 moved on to the RFP stage, the request for proposal, and we did the same thing. We put together a sharp, robust, good-looking proposal, and we were ultimately chosen to move forward.
And here we are today. Gary, let's turn to you, because I know we write about you in the newspaper, and we often say Houston-based developer, but that's not very descriptive. Tell us a little bit about yourself beyond that. How you came to be in the area and how you came to be in the development business.
Yeah, I first came to Crescent Butte in 1981. Stayed there in the Forest Queen there on Elk with my wife and I. And as time went on, we would come skiing here. And as our family grew, eventually it grew about 13 kids. We adopted 11. But we would come in the summertime, go camping and skiing. And then a number of years ago, we decided to buy a second home here in the Crescent Butte area. And a couple of years before that, I had started subscribing to the paper and always heard about the housing needs, but that wasn't really what brought me here, and that wasn't why we bought. But after a couple of years of living here, about 60% of the time, I told my wife, I think we can do something to help on this housing need and building an apartment complex, because that is what I'm involved in. When I was 18, I started buying rent houses, and 1986, bought my first apartment complex there in Houston. We usually buy distressed type properties. We don't really build from ground up. And I still own the first one I bought. Today it's grown to about 6,000 units. We have about 500 employees, and a couple hundred employees are in the construction phase, because a lot of times we have to rebuild these complexes, or if we have a fire or hurricane, we have to rebuild from the ground up. So it gave me the experience in being able to develop a project like this.
Sounds to me like you came to Crested Butte to play and to rest, maybe hike in the hills, spend some time with your kids. And yet you chose to dive into a project that you probably had a pretty good idea was gonna be controversial. I mean, you said already you've been reading the newspaper. You know that people in this community feel strongly about what they feel strongly about, and that they're willing to fight for what they believe in. And yet you threw your hat into this ring. Why on earth would you do that?
Well, I talked with a lot of people, and we develop a team made up of local people, because they understand the character and the heart of the community, and I wanted to build a project that fit in with the community. But really, everyone was very supportive of the project that I've talked to, and it's still the same thing. The main opposition has been the neighborhood surrounding the area, has certainly been fairly vocal, but even they acknowledge the need for affordable housing.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in the community, correct me if I'm wrong, John, I mean, you've been here a long time, would argue with the idea that, we've got an affordable housing crisis on our hands. Our community is in danger of being hollowed out by driving middle-class families especially away. We do have a workforce that's living in their cars or in tents. Nobody's arguing that, really. The argument seems to be that you've come in here and you've proposed a project that is too dense, too much, in the wrong place, and that doesn't fit in well with the character of the community. So let's take those maybe one at a time and hear what you have to say about these various objections, which seem to be legitimate. I mean, people bring valid points to the table on these. Let's start with density. 240 units at a place that is right now mostly pasture land. How did you get to that number, and in what way do you think that's the right number?
The 240 units works out to about 15 units, 16 units per acre. And there's a number of developments even in that area that have the same density, and even up toward the mountain, there's development up there that has the same density. So the being 16 units per acre is not out of line with what's been done in the past. But this specific piece of land, is one of the most difficult things is trying to find an appropriate piece of land that you can actually do a development like a multifamily on. And you can probably count on one hand the number of parcels that are available in the area in the North Valley that you could build 60 units or larger. And the problem is if you build 60 units, then it's going to require a lot of government assistance to make that work.
And why is that?
Because when you get it down to that size, you almost have to make it all deed restricted. And if you make it all deed restricted, especially in the city of Creston Butte, the development cost is much, much higher. You're getting up to $300, $350 a foot to build. And the only way you can make that affordable is a lot of massive government assistance. So if you look at the number of parcels that are available, it's very limited. And this one is ideal because of its locations within 1.5 miles of the city. It's right there on 135, which makes it easy for the buses to get in and be able to pick up people to take up to the mountain or to Gunnison. And so it fits in real well. And you have to have, like I said, the 240 units because of all the infrastructure costs that you're doing. And if you want to do it with government assistance, you can certainly reduce the density, but then that's going to require a lot of government assistance. And those are the projects that one reason we've got such a deficit in affordable housing is because there's never enough money from the private industry and the public industry to be able to build enough units to meet the demand that's out there, and that's why it's such a deficit as it is right now.
Well, I think what we're saying is there are pockets of comparable density out along the Brush Creek corridor. The Stallion Park area is about 15 units an acre when it'll be built out. The Skyland Lodge and the Lynx units around there is around 15 units an acre as well. So there are pockets of comparable density. The Brush Creek corridor is going to grow a lot. It's from the planning documents for the East River Sanitation District and Skyland. It's going to be around 4,000 people when it's built out. There's a lot going on out there. There's an airstrip. There's light industrial across the street. There's an RV park across the street. Another light industrial coming. It's not a pristine pasture land. There's a lot of multifamily out there, so there's compatibility of uses. It's going to be a busy road. And so when we think about 240 units, 500 or 600 people, compared to 4,000 that are going to be out there, yeah, this fits. It is compatible. That's going to be a busy place.
What have you built into the project sketch plan to ensure that it does fit in to the community? Presumably you've thought about that. What have you got in mind to allay people's fears that this will not fit with the character of that neighborhood?
I think the first thing that Gary did is he hired a great, strong, very experienced local team. Andrew Hadley's been building houses in the valley for over 20 years. He's built numerous houses out there at Skyland. Got two great engineering firms. We've got a very qualified landscape architect with Margaret from Sprout Studio. So there's a team that's been living and working in this valley a long time. In fact, if you add up the number of years that our team has been working in this valley, it's over 150 years. So they're very experienced working in the valley, and this is where they live and breathe and raise their kids and coach soccer, and so they're very committed to this valley, and they understand it, and they know what fits and what doesn't. I think also, one of the things we tried to do was to cluster the buildings and create a lot of open space. Over half of the parcel is dedicated to open space. Trying to keep green natural areas, trying to put the bigger buildings towards the back of the property, trying to keep everything as low as possible off of that central ridge. Trying to create something that looks good. The buildings along Brush Creek Road will really match the design and architecture of the Skyland buildings with gabled roofs, the building materials, breaks in the roofs. We've got a lot of smart people on this team that have lived here a long time and are committed to creating something that works, that fits.
All right, well, let's shift then and talk a little bit about traffic, because that's what you've been talking about, what the buildings themselves will look like. What about the impact on traffic right there? A lot of people are afraid that suddenly there's going to be a stoplight, maybe lots of cars coming and going. How have you guys tried to address that issue? Well, first of all, do you agree with that? And to the extent that you do agree with it, what are you doing to address the issue of traffic flow?
I think our number one concern for that intersection is that it's a safe intersection. And so we're in the middle of a traffic study, working with CDOT, determining what are those numbers now, and what numbers would our project add. We haven't finished it yet, but I think what the data that comes out of that traffic study will determine, does something need to be done to keep this a safe intersection. We're not there yet, in the middle of it.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison, Colorado's locally owned hometown newspaper. Think Radio is also supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can join the Think Radio community of patrons, visit alanwartismedia.com. That's ALANWARTES media.com.
Talk to me a little more about your team. Who else have we got working that's from the Valley? You've mentioned a couple of people, Andrew Hadley. You've mentioned landscaping. Who else should we know about that's on this team?
Well, Jerry Burgess and Tyler Harpel from SGM, one of the stronger engineering firms in the Valley. Tyler lives up at the north end of the Valley. He's a soccer coach, coached my daughter. Both very qualified folks. There's another engineering firm, REG, Resource Engineering Group, with August and Dodson. They'll be handling a lot of the efficiency questions, trying to build these really, really efficient. Doug Croft is on the team. Doug's been in the Valley for over 40 years, very experienced. He brings a lot of wisdom and just counsel as we're discussing things. Christopher Klein, really excited to have him supervising the construction. He's just kind of a no-nonsense guy who gets it done on budget and on time, and he's been doing it quite a while here in the Valley. And then we've got Kendall Burgermeister from Law of the Rockies, who's handling a lot of the legal and water issues, strategy, trying to figure out what's next. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met.
Yeah, well, speaking of what's next, one thing that happened this week is that a report that was commissioned by the Town Council of Crested Butte, asking Melanie Reese, who's a well-known and well-respected housing consultant in the Mountain West, to take a look at the Brush Creek proposal in light of the 2016 Gunnison Valley Housing Needs Assessment, which in many ways kicked this conversation off. I mean, housing is a conversation we have over the years. It never seems to go away, right? But that assessment put some hard numbers to things and caused people to say, we really do need to do something now. And so Melanie was asked to come back and take a look at this proposal in light of the assessment. Talk to me about that report, which I know you've read and you've responded to. Give me an idea of how you see that report in light of what it is you have in mind. Gary?
The things that was frustrating about the report is we had approached Melanie when we first was going to build got selected to work with us, but she had kind of let it known that she was against this kind of a density of a project. And so when she did a report, it would have been much more helpful if she had talked with us, because she made some assumptions that were wrong. For example, assuming that the rental units would have to be rented at a certain rent level. Well, that was just based on taking the highest average median income that we would supply a unit for. We're going to be supplying units anywhere from people who make from 30% of average median income up to 180%. Someone earning 180% could conceivably make about $100,000 a year. Well, under affordable housing guidelines, the maximum rent you can charge is 30% of their income. So if someone was earning $100,000, it's conceivable that you could charge up to $30,000 an annual rent, which works out to about $2,800 a month. And so she made the assumption in her report that this project couldn't find people to really pay $2,800 a rent, in that because of that, these units wouldn't be leased and it could lead to a project failure.
Well, is it ever your intention to charge $2,800 a month for rent for any of these units?
Right. No, it never was. Our pro forma is really based on probably rents being at almost half of that, and those are for the free market type rents. Some of the rents are going to be rented for as low as about $450 a month for those making 30% of income. So even the people at 180%, those units for a 2-bedroom, we would probably, our pro forma is based on renting those for around $1,500 to $1,800 a month, nowhere close to the $2,800.
Now, one of the other things that Melanie said in this report was that the plan as proposed overshoots the need in number of units. What's your response to that?
Well, I think even her needs show at a minimum 171 units for affordable housing, and we're not even providing that. But, on one hand, if this really does provide all the affordable, if there's 240 units and we setting aside 65% of them for affordable housing, of which that's 156 units will be for affordable housing. If that somehow solves all the problem for affordable housing, then which I don't think it will, but then that means you never have to worry about trying to raise money from taxpayers to do any more affordable housing. And I just don't think this one project is going to solve all the problems. The demand is out there pretty significantly to more than fill this project. And the other 35% of the units, they'll be rented out at the free market rate. And this project isn't coming online probably until about 2019 for even the first phase of it.
And how many units do you plan in the first phase?
In the first phase, probably the best that we're going to be able to do is about 128 units because of the building season that you have. And then it's going to take into 2020 or even into 2021 before you can finish out the project.
Something that we should talk about is the data from the needs assessment goes to 2020, which is really about 26 months away. And the way the trends are showing is that this housing need isn't going to go away. It's just getting stronger and stronger. The hole's getting deeper and deeper. So our horizon is 20 years out, not 26 months. And this piece of property is so strategic, so close to town, that it really needs to be used wisely. I would hate to just base the numbers on a 4-year planning horizon. We're thinking 20, 30 years out, somewhere where my kids could live if they, got through with school and wanted to come build a life back in Crested Butte.
All right. Well, that's a good place to shift gears again, because we've been talking a lot of nuts and bolts. We've been talking unit numbers and percentage of AMI and density and acres and so forth. As I look at the community debate that has developed, it seems to me that in some ways this conversation really isn't about affordable housing at all. In some ways what people are objecting to is the idea that the community that they've known and loved is changing. And they're afraid that this project accelerates that change or somehow shifts the change in a direction that is not in keeping with the community as it has been. What do you think about that idea, that really we're not always talking about affordable housing here? We're talking about a grander vision of what kind of community this is and what kind of community it's going to be. How does that question fit in your mind, to this particular project?
One thing that concerns me with that argument is you have two main groups in opposition. You have those that have been here for many, many years, and they suffered to get here and struggled. And they've been here for 20, 30 years, and they don't want to see it change. They're upset when the paved road or unpaved roads become paved. And I understand that, but it's a lot more difficult. Those same people probably couldn't enter the valley today, because as difficult as it was 20 years ago, it's infinitely more difficult now. The other group in opposition is the second homeowners. I for lack of better words, I call them the one percenters. And what they want to do is kind of build an economic wall and make it more difficult. Right now, we have a lot of people that live in Gunnison that have to commute either by bus or by car because of their job in Crested Butte. And economically, they can't move into the north end of the valley because of this out of balance in affordable housing. And to sit there and say that, we don't want to change the character, but at the same time, the jobs are already there, the people are commuting, and you're forcing them to have to drive 30 miles just because you got a place that's already in. That's kind of unfair.
Yeah, well, and so how do you address that then? If you're sitting in a, if we're sitting around a living room right now and we've got a fair representation of all of the people and all of the points of view, how do you guys address that question? What do you say to people who are just basically afraid that things are changing in a way that is out of their control and will take away the community that they love? Is there some argument that brings them together with this vision and disarms that fear?
Yeah, I like to talk about what, the vision that people have for Crested Butte. What kind of town do you want Crested Butte to become? Because the trends and the data is clear. In the last 20 years, housing available for locals has decreased by about 27%. Over half the homes in town are owned by someone who doesn't live there year-round. And so the availability of long-term housing for locals, the affordability is just decreasing significantly. We can't stop people from buying second homes. We really can't stop the short-term rental market that's happening. We just passed a tax, which I thought was a good idea, but we can't stop it. One thing we can do is use every available piece of land that's appropriate and create housing for locals. Housing that's affordable, housing that's efficient, and give them a home, give them a place to build a life here. So I think, we need to do this on the Brush Creek property. We need to do this on Block 79 and 80 in Crested Butte. We need to do it at Mount Crested Butte. We've got to do it in Gunnison, at Almont, and Crested Butte South, just to get out of the hole we're in and come against the market forces that are forcing the locals out.
And John, you've been thinking about affordable housing for quite some time, right? You said that you picked that as your issue when you came back to the Valley. Can you point to an example of a community that's doing this well, that has figured out this balance between community character, the need for housing, economics, government involvement, all of those complex things? Is there somewhere you can say that's a good example?
That's a great question, Alan. I don't know if I can. I think this is a tremendous challenge and a tremendous problem globally. Everywhere you look, you see one of the most significant issues is housing. And I feel like I am relatively new to this world and learning a ton every day, doing everything I can to learn. So I think there's people who have been building housing in a lot of places over in Summit County. Aspen's done a lot of great work. Everybody's trying to figure it out. In my mind, it's like, let's make the most of every piece of land we have. Let's think outside the box. We have to have density. We've got to have subsidized projects for the lower AMIs. We've got to have private projects for the higher AMIs. It's going to take a lot of creativity and trying lots of different approaches.
Well, and so in what way do you feel the corner at Brush Creek is an innovative approach and is a creative solution? Is it even something that you would apply the word unique to? Does this project have groundbreaking characteristics in your view?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think most of the things that we've seen in the past have been government-subsidized programs. And here we've got a private-public partnership where 4 entities showed a lot of foresight and purchased a piece of land close to town 18 years ago. And then we've got someone that shows up who's a scrappy operator who's been running workforce housing for many, many years, very experienced, has some resources and experience to bring to bear, who wants to help.
Alan, you brought up a good point in saying, is there any community that has solved the problem? And I guess you're referring to a community where there is a need for affordable housing, let's say in Colorado,
right,
in the ski resort areas. And the problem is, even with this 240 units, when you look at the number of parcels that are available to build, you need to maximize the density on this piece of property, because it's one, as many people have said, it's one of the last pieces available this close to town. And while this might help bring it more in balance with affordable housing, long term, this area it's going to be out of balance again, and really it's going to grow even a bigger problem in the future because you have such limited areas that you can build. Just in the Brush Creek area, for the second homes, it's projected to double over a number of years. That's what they've got platted and they have available, that land. That's not affordable housing. These are $2 million homes. And so this is going to be a bigger problem on down the road. This might help bring it somewhat in balance for the short term, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I don't know how you're ever going to bring it back in balance, because this is the last piece of good land that you could do this on.
So how does a community go about facing a problem like that, a reality like that, and still have a say-so in what the character and the essential nature of the community is? Is that an impossible task? I mean, I realize we're up at the 60,000-foot philosophical level now, but what do you think? Is this possible to face the growth pressures like we're having now in the Gunnison Valley and still retain a level of community control over the direction the community takes?
I see in this area, and even talking to some of the city council people, I agree with them when I've had some private conversations that there is a need, as John was pointing out, it used to be more owner-occupied housing in Creston Butte, but over time that has switched to where now it's the majority of it is second homeowners. This project is not going to solve that. And what Creston Butte needs, and they see the need, is to try to build more affordable housing. They're trying to get ahead of the project. And at least this project will help relieve to where they don't have to worry. It will help take some of the pressure off, because they need to build 20, 30, 40 units inside the Creston Butte so that you do have people who live and work and can work right there in the middle of the town, instead of eventually being further and further out. I mean, it's very important that this project be done in conjunction with Creston Butte continuing to build some affordable housing within their city limits.
All right. What are the next steps for your team in moving the corner at Brush Creek forward? What's up next? I mean, we've had some public meetings. You've initiated the process with the Planning Commission. There's this new Reese report on the table. What's next for you guys?
You know, we've got another meeting with the County Planning Commission a week from tomorrow on Friday. The theme will be affordability. What is affordable housing? So we're preparing for that. We've also got a meeting with the new Crested Butte Town Council on, I think it's tentatively set for Thursday, November 30th. We're excited to meet that council, and we'll introduce the whole team to them and do a brief overview of the project and answer questions. I think, too, you know, every day I meet people that are in favor of this project, and most of them are waitresses, people that work in shops, work in the community. And this, you know, we've got to find a way to give this silent majority a voice.
What are your ideas about that?
Well, I think, you know, we've started a Facebook page. I think we're going to have some meetings and just try to get people together and let them ask questions about the project, talk about it. We've got some petitions going around. I think another task that we've got to do is just educate the public about the project. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so we'll be coming out with some educational pieces in the paper.
Misinformation like what?
I think, you know, not sure I want to answer that one online, but I think, you know, people have thrown a lot of numbers out there. People have thrown out numbers about the number of dogs that are going to be on this property, or the number of kids that this will add to the school, without any factual basis at all. And so we'd like to get the right information out there.
Now, if I'm a private citizen and I would like to engage with you, I've got some questions, some comments. How do I do that? How do I find you? And are you even willing to listen to what I have to say?
Absolutely. We welcome any and all input. We've got a website up that is thecorner@brushcreek.com. There is an email address on that website, or a button you can click. The email would come to me. It's info@thecorner@brushcreek.com. I would welcome any input, positive, negative, whatever thoughts you might have. You could also go to our Facebook page and leave some comments there. We will answer every comment that we're given.
As you continue with the Planning Commission and they begin to really dig in to the details of this project. How flexible is this plan? 240 units is now sort of burned into everybody's mind. The distribution of deed restrictions to free market is well-discussed numbers. How different could this project look on the other side of Planning Commission review? How much wiggle room is there?
We've been involved in engaging the public and listening to the comments. Even those in opposition, the city of Crescent Butte had a town hall meeting, and John did a great job up on our website, is every question and us responding to every one of those questions the best that we can. But there has been changes in this project all along, in that there was concern in how the front looks, so we designed it to fit in with the Skyland type community. There was concern about the number of parking that could be seen, so a number of the parking was done underground or underneath. There was concern about all the toys that people have living here in this area. So every unit was designed with storage units. And so there has been a lot of, there was even a request to up the number of affordable housing from 50%, which is now up to 65%. So there's been, that's all part of the process. So when it comes down to the final decision, the reason hopefully it will be successfully voted on and passed is because we've been making these changes as time goes along. And that's and that's part of the process. That's why it takes a year or so. And I know one of the biggest issues is the density, but that has to really remain, pretty much at the 240 units, because, if you reduce it 10 units, that really doesn't make any change. If you reduce it down to, let's say, 171 that Melanie put in a report, well, then then it's going to have massive public tax monies, and then, that's a whole different type of project. But with all the infrastructure that needs to go in, this really needs to remain at 240, but we're trying to change everything else that we possibly can.
One last question. Of all the things that you could be spending your time and your energy and a fair amount of angst, I would imagine, on, why did you choose this project? Why affordable housing? What is it about that gets you up in the morning and makes you willing to do what you have to do?
I think part of it comes, adopted 11 kids. Every kid that we adopted came from a difficult background. I think it's been my wife and I's passion to help in situations that, we've been blessed, in business, family, marriage. I just see a passion in trying to help solve problems that really sometimes is a social type imbalance. And really, if you put a stake in the center of Houston and you draw a 15-mile circumference around that, everything, all 6,000 my units are within that 15-mile area. I've never had a desire to build outside of that. My whole desire for being involved in this project was purely because I saw a need, and I felt that I had some things that I could help bring to the table to help solve a problem. It was never about trying to make money. It was all about just trying to help build the project. And I think by the fact that I can do it, bringing my people, I can do it at a much lower cost. I'm not worried about trying to make development fees or anything like that. I just felt that I can deliver a project well below average building cost and help try to solve a need. And that's where all my passion for this project has been.
All right. Gary, John, thanks for joining us.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison, Colorado's locally owned hometown newspaper.
Think Radio is a production of Alan Wardis Media. The show's associate producer is Kat Seibert. Music by Issa Forrest. You've been listening to Think Radio on KWSB FM 91.1 in Gunnison, Colorado, from the campus of Western State Colorado University. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Think Radio.